But from the very offset of the verdict coming through, we have known that Nikita Han and her legal team have committed perjury themselves during the original court case. It was proven that she lied under oath in front of the judge and jury when putting forward her case about James Lawrence, and nobody spoke about perjury in that instance. Wall-to-wall coverage this week of the Conor McGregor story. He had 2 new witnesses that were going to testify and say that they had seen Nikita Han being beat up by her ex-partner, who coincidentally disappeared the morning after Nikita Han came home and said that she had spent the last 24 hours with Conor McGregor and his buddy in a hotel room, taking some substances and doing some other stuff. You're not allowed to question that. You're not allowed to even surmise that maybe he got annoyed and left. But hey, whatever. So 2 new witnesses were due to appear in court and testify under oath that they had seen an argument that got extremely physical between Nikita Han and her ex-boyfriend. The morning of the court proceedings, Conor McGregor's team withdrew their new evidence, which sparked outrage against the virtue signalers and the social justice warriors and the mainstream media, who are calling for Conor McGregor to be held accountable in terms of perjury. A file is apparently being sent to the DPP by Nikita Han's legal team requesting the same. And when you jump onto social media, you'll see that it's perjury this, perjury that, he needs to be locked up, lying under oath, all this type of stuff. And I find it very intriguing that this week, after the court proceedings, Nikita Han has found herself in some extremely hot water also. And if you didn't hate the media enough, they didn't even cover it. They didn't even talk about it. We just got plastered wall to wall. Conor McGregor is a serial assaulter and he needs to go down. And look, he's making a mockery of the court and lying under oath. That's what we got. And in fact, the inversion is quite true when it comes to Nikita Han as well. I want to show you a little clip from Gorry. He's a solicitor and I guess like a vlogger. He's done some good work during the trial of Nikita Han and Conor McGregor. Very biased towards Nikita Han and obviously didn't like Conor McGregor. That's fine. It's subjective. He's trying to be objective, but it didn't work out for him. But in terms of being a legal voice and knowing what he's talking about, I think this was a very interesting clip that I saw coming out, and he was the only one, in fairness, that actually spoke in these terms after what we saw transpire during court proceedings this week.
There was bad news this week in the Court of Appeal for Conor McGregor, but I think there was actually bad news for Nikita Han as well. Let me explain. Firstly, the bad news for Conor McGregor. The Court of Appeal is now asking the DPP to consider possible perjury concerning the fresh evidence. So McGregor was to introduce new fresh evidence at the Court of Appeal, in which neighbours of Nikita Han were going to testify or give evidence that they had seen a row between Nikita Han and her then partner and physical altercation, as it were, and that might explain the bruising. However, that was withdrawn. The application to introduce that evidence was withdrawn the morning of the hearing. And so that has given rise to all sorts of rumour and speculation as to how or why that would happen.
Of course it gave rise to rumour and speculation because the media jumped all over it. And as I said, you had some like mentally ill campaigners standing up outside the courthouse. These people that are literally up on stages hanging out with Ruth Coppinger with absolute venom in their eyes. Of course there's going to be a barrage of people saying, see, I told you so. There was absolutely no evidence. This is not objectivity. This is just delusion. Absolute delusion.
These people, the neighbours, had already sworn affidavits some time ago, and obviously they were going to be open then to give evidence in the trial or in the hearing. But that application, as I say, to introduce that fresh evidence was withdrawn by McGregor's side on the morning of the hearing. And that has given rise to the Court of Appeal concerning or considering asking the DPP to consider whether perjury arising from this fresh evidence. So the Court of Appeal is referring to the DPP material concerning the fresh evidence filed on behalf of Conor McGregor for consideration of possible perjury. So that's the bad news for McGregor. There's bad news, however, I think, for Nikita Han as well. A lot of people are overlooking the fact that McGregor's appeal against the finding in the High Court by the jury that he sexually assaulted and essentially raped Nikita Han, his appeal against that went ahead even in the absence of the fresh evidence, and he had different grounds for doing that or bringing that appeal. But there's bad news for It's bad news for Nikita Hand.
I think that, as he said there, is an overlooked part of this story. Even though this fresh evidence wasn't available during the appeal process initially, the appeal still went through. So someone in higher stature within the justice system of Ireland looked at that case, and taking all biases aside, obviously they looked at what transpired during this court case, and what I believe personally was absolutely ludicrous behaviour from Justice Owens, the judge who was proceeding over this. Insane behaviour. And I'm sure behind closed doors within the judicial system of Ireland, this judge's peers are thinking, how are you doing that? Why are you doing that? This is not going to work out well. So with all that taken into account, there was an appeal granted. So after the jury found that he was liable in this civil case, remember, and with all the interference from Justice Owens, which we went through ad nauseum, continuously telling the jury to forget about certain testimonies and continuously angling them towards other testimonies. Absolute ludicrous behaviour. So maybe as a result of that, that's why the appeal went through without any fresh evidence, because whoever was above Mr. Owens was thinking, okay, this is crazy, right?
So McGregor's appeal went ahead anyway with the Court of Appeal. I think there's bad news for Nikita Hand here, because in addition to McGregor's appeal, McGregor's mate James Lawrence was appealing the award of costs, or the failure rather, by Mr. Justice Alexander Owens to award him his costs. The usual situation in litigation is that the loser pays the costs of the winner. And in this case, remember, Nikita Hand won against Conor McGregor in relation to her claim. However, she also accused James Lawrence of rape or sexually assaulting her, etc., etc., and that was not found to be the case by the jury. Nevertheless, the judge, because he took the view, Mr. Justice Alexander Owens took the view that Conor McGregor and James Lawrence were acting in lockstep, and Mr. McGregor paid Mr. Lawrence's legal costs. The judge didn't award Mr. Lawrence his legal costs. However, that flies in the face of the usual rule, where, as I say, the usual rule is that the loser pays. And in this case, in relation to Nikita Hand versus Lawrence, she was the loser.
Another great point by Terry here, and again the way he delivers it is kind of like he's on eggshells, because he doesn't want to go all in, because we know what he's saying here is absolutely damning for the whole Nikita Hand narrative. So let's just put it into perspective. Social media has blown up. The mainstream media has blown up talking about perjury and the DPP, and Conor McGregor must go down for lying under oath. But from the very offset of the verdict coming through that went against Conor McGregor and did find him liable in this civil case, we have known that Nikita Hand and her legal team have committed perjury themselves during the original court case. Is everybody missing that? So to be up on the stand under oath and to be lying about the James Lawrence incident and have your legal team go through the rigmarole of actually putting forward a case in front of a judge and having accusations aimed at James Lawrence, and then for all of that to fall down and for the jury and for the judge to come out with the verdict that none of that transpired, does that not constitute perjury on behalf of Nikita Hand and her legal team, as the story that her and her legal team decided to go with was deemed untrue in a court of law and by a judge and jury? Is that not perjury also? And saying it in the nicest terms, that it's just not the norm to see a judge not award compensation or the fees to the person who was accused and then deemed innocent. It's just not normal the way that's done. Of course it's not normal. I think the word you're looking for is it's not legal, is what you actually meant to say. But in fairness, he's doing a great job of treading water here and not absolutely slamming Justice Alexander Owens and Nikita Hand and her legal team for lying repeatedly under oath and wasting the time of the court and of the jury.
The Court of Appeal have given some indication, and this is where I think the bad news comes for Nikita Hand, because Senior Counsel John Fitzgerald for Mr. Lawrence, he argued on Wednesday that his client was entitled to his costs against Miss Hand on grounds including the normal cost rule that they go to the winning party. So that's the normal rule, and Mr. Lawrence, as Senior Counsel, is absolutely correct in that. And Ray Boland, however, Senior Counsel for Miss Hand, submitted that the trial judge had discretion to make the order he had When counsel said an order for costs against Miss Hand would wipe out her damages award, Miss Justice Kennedy in the Court of Appeal said wanting the court to take cognizance of possible consequences of its orders was, quote, a difficult argument to make.
Justice Kennedy in the Court of Appeals is saying it in the most diplomatic way possible that what did transpire, it's not really normal for the accused after being found not guilty to not receive his legal fees. It's not normal. Of course it's not normal. It's not legal.
Justice Kennedy is indicating that the argument being made on behalf of Nikita Hand that if Lawrence was to get his costs awarded, it would wipe out her damages award. Miss Justice Kennedy has said that that was, quote, a difficult argument to make. You can read what you like into that, but obviously that particular judge, and there's 3 judges in the Court of Appeal, but that particular judge has given a sort of an indication that the argument that any costs awarded against Miss Hand would wipe out her damages award, that's not an argument that's going to win the day, quite frankly. That's what she seems to be indicating. That's what I'm reading into it anyway. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but she's not using the word difficult in relation to that argument for nothing. In other words, she's accepting the argument, but she says it's a difficult argument to make. And therefore, I think the bad news for Nikita Hand is that it's quite likely, well, it's possible, in my view, it's likely that the Court of Appeal will actually award costs to Mr. Lawrence against Nikita Hand. And if that's the case, according to Nikita Hand's own senior counsel, it would wipe out her damages award.
Trying to make the argument that Mr. Lawrence's legal fees were being paid by a millionaire, so we don't have to pay him costs as we do normally or legally, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. I suspect that her winnings, her 280,000 or whatever it was, she managed to hustle out of Conor McGregor. I suspect that there's way more money there than that, and it's not coming from Conor McGregor. It's coming from a higher source, but that's just an opinion.
The comment by Miss Justice Kennedy in the Court of Appeal, that she said that the argument that was being made by Miss Hand's senior counsel was a difficult argument to make. You can judge for yourself. Let's see what happens. The Court of Appeal have reserved judgment in this. And remember, there's 2 aspects to the appeal. One is Conor McGregor appealing against the finding by the High Court civil jury that he had raped Nikita Hand. And the other appeal, though, is James Lawrence's appeal against the order for costs not being granted to him. In other words, no order or his costs were not awarded to him. And as I say, Mr. Justice Alexander Owens, who had discretion, absolutely took the view that because McGregor and Lawrence were actually acting in what he described as lockstep, he didn't award Lawrence his costs, even though, strictly speaking, Lawrence won vis-a-vis Miss Hand.
So James Lawrence won his case against Nikita Hand in front of the world. Not much coverage from the mainstream media. It was proven that she lied under oath in front of the judge and jury when putting forward her case about James Lawrence. And nobody spoke about perjury in that instance, but they speak about it a lot in terms of Conor McGregor's new evidence that didn't make it to the court on Wednesday. The extremely biased judge that was overseeing proceedings with the James Lawrence, Nikita Hand and Conor McGregor case totally went against legality and didn't award cost to James Lawrence after he won because his friend was Conor McGregor. So he got punished for having a friend with a few pound in the bank. So in a week where we see the media completely destroy Conor McGregor and activists coming out of the woodwork and nut jobs over on social media talking about perjury and the DPP and Conor must go down this time, wake up, have a little look around, take off the old goggles and just listen to a legal professional like good old Terry here and just accept the fact that Nikita has been lying from the beginning and it was proven in a court of law, but no one wants to talk about it. Let me know your thoughts down below. Hit like, subscribe and share if any of it made sense. Cheers.